Alright, it definitely took a little bit considering there were 3 banners this patch, but finally, all the characters intended to be released during version 1 of Arknights Endfield are officially out, and as such, I think it's a pretty good time to do a follow-up video to my older video about the 4 and 5 stars in this game, but this time, we'll be talking about the 6 stars instead. Just like before in that older video, I want to stress that this game actually has a ton of nuance from character to character, and as such, it's extremely difficult to simply just say that one character is better or worse than another, because a lot of them have different scenarios where they can shine, even if it might not seem that way on paper. So, what I'm going to do today is break down each of the characters' kits and explain what their intended role is, and then give them a ranking in 4 different categories that, at least in my opinion, can highlight where those shining spots may be. To quickly go through these categories, first, despite this list not being a DPS tier list or whatever, it is still necessary to talk about the damage that each character can do, so that'll be one category. Next will be utility, meaning what each character can do apart from damage. After that will be versatility, which will be how many different scenarios you can use each character in. And lastly, we'll talk about longevity, which will mostly discuss how well I think the character will scale in the game long term. So let's get started, and just like in that first video, we're going to go alphabetically, starting with everyone's favorite sheep, Ardelia. For those of you that watched the 4 and 5 star video, you'll probably have an idea of what I'm about to say in terms of damage here, but yeah, Ardelia is a healer. At least for now, Arknights Endfield has been pretty good about not overtuning its healers or supports for that matter to the point that they can deal damage on top of whatever else they provide, and Ardelia is honestly no different. Just like the other healer Zaihi, her damage basically just tickles the enemy when you look at the raw numbers, and as such, it is really difficult to rate her damage all that high, but with that said, she can get at least a little bit of damage out of her ultimate, assuming you use it after she applies the art susceptibility via her skill. So instead of all the way at the bottom at a 1, I'll give her a 2, or you know what, we'll say a 2.5 for damage. Utility-wise, this is definitely one of the categories where Ardelia is pretty good. As I just mentioned, she can actually apply art susceptibility via her skill, but on top of that, she can also apply corrosion from their combo skill as well. And with each of those debuffs applied via a different thing, it actually gives her very high uptime on, actually having a debuff applied to the enemy. If you don't know, to actually apply the susceptibility from her skill, you have to consume corrosion that's applied from her combo skill. But there's nothing there that says you have to immediately consume it. So you can actually wait till the corrosion almost runs out to consume it, and then that increases the time that the enemy actually has a debuff applied to them, whether that's art susceptibility or corrosion. If you add on top of that the fact that she can heal to sustain your team, I mean, yeah, it's pretty hard to really rate this category low at all, so she'll get an 8 there for me. The only reason that I wouldn't put her higher there is because while her healing is very good, the only place that it currently is necessary to use is Umbral Monument, so that's basically why it's not that much higher. Versatility wise, I think this is actually her best point because she really has a slot pretty much everywhere in pretty much every team in the game. Like sure, there are some teams that don't want her, like the Sustainless physical team for example, but there are plenty of other physical teams that you can use her in regardless. I think honestly she really just has enough generic value here that she can go pretty much anywhere in the entire game you want, especially so when you've got a scenario like, I'm not really sure what to put as the 4th slot here, so I guess I'll use Ardelia. And as such, I think she'll actually get one of the rare 10s here in this category. Lastly, for longevity, I mean, honestly, I really don't know if we're going to get a character as generically useful as her for quite a while, and if you add on the fact that, she's free on top of that, I mean, yeah, I think I'll rate her pretty high here as well at an 8. And to clarify why that's not higher, she can actually be dethroned in each of her roles, and in some cases she already is. Because I mean, I'm sure at some point we're gonna get someone that heals more, and we already have characters that can debuff more too, so even though she is generically useful, that doesn't mean she won't get filtered out as more specific options release in the future. Now we can move on to Ember, and honestly, yeah, she's a weird one that most people would consider one of the worst 6 stars in the entire game, if not, worse than some of the 4 and 5 stars. Personally, I don't really agree with that, and I do think she has some use, because if you remember what I said at the beginning of this video, each and every character in this game does actually have a spot where they can shine, and she's no different here. For those of you unfamiliar with Ember, her kit in general is undoubtedly one of the more awkward kits the game has. For one, she's a split element unit which inherently comes with its own problems. Like, she deals heat damage on some of her abilities, but then a lot of her kit actually works with what a physical team wants because, she applies stagger and knockdown. On top of that, she can sustain the team via shields with her ultimate, but the actual real sustain part of her kit, meaning, the healing, comes from her combo skill, and the trigger for that skill means you have to actually get hit for it to activate. So all in all, this results in a really awkward or weird kit, like I said. I mean, you've got an operator dealing 2 different types of damage that only favors one of those types, And on top of that, she sustains via getting hit, which, kind of defeats the whole purpose of sustaining. But despite all of that, she does actually still have a use in this game, and that's mostly through the one thing that I mentioned earlier, which was stagger. See, if your goal is to go for big damage nukes during a stagger window, she's actually one of the best applicators for that stagger. I mean, genuinely, she does a massive chunk of stagger bar damage, and that helps cycle through rotations, and on top of that, like I mentioned earlier, that does actually give her viability in physical teams. And in those teams, when she's built as a damage dealer, she can end up doing a pretty significant amount of the team's damage overall, and despite the awkwardness of her kit, ends up having a really impactful role in it. So as a result of all this, her damage score honestly is one that fluctuates depending on how you as the player use her, and really, she kind of encapsulates the depth that Endfield combat has as a whole. Like, characters that might seem bricked or useless on paper, or ones that might seem like the worst character in the entire game actually do have a purpose, it just might be one that you have to actually look for. So in total, her damage score will be a 4 if you are using her predominantly as your sustainer, but really, I do have to stress this, I don't think that's her best role, because if you build her as a DPS, she can easily reach up to around a 7 or so, at least in my opinion. Utility-wise, like I said earlier, the sustain part of her kit is kinda awkward, and as such the stagger she offers is where the vast majority of her utility comes from, so for this one I'll rate it at a 6. Versatility-wise, on the other hand though, yeah, this one is kind of a yikes because she really only has a physical stagger team as a place where she's really good, and that directly translates into her longevity too. Like, the second we get a physical sustainer, like one that is fully intended for physical teams, for example one that provides a bunch of physical related debuffs, or even buffs for that matter, Ember's role will definitely fall off even harder and make her even more specific to that stagger team comp. As such, both her versatility and her longevity are going to be pretty low here, and personally I'm going to rate both at a 3. Moving on to the Penguinistrator, we've got Endmin. They're actually pretty unique as a character because they're one of the few characters in the game that can be both a regular main DPS, but a sub DPS as well. The bonus with them though is that unlike the other characters in the game that can do this, for example Wolfguard, I don't actually think the Endmin sacrifices all that much to do one or the other, or in short, they're pretty good at both. Really, every part of their kit synergizes pretty well with the rest of it regardless of which role you decide to put them in, and honestly I think the vast majority of that comes from their combo skill, which applies Originium crystals to the enemy. As a main DPS they can actually consume those crystals to increase their damage, which gives them extra hits, but as a sub DPS they can actually leave those crystals on the enemies to increase the physical damage that the enemy takes, making them pretty solid as a support or sub DPS mix. At least in my opinion, this obviously makes them pretty flexible, and as such definitely a pretty solid unit overall. But with that said, damage-wise, I do think they suffer just a little bit in comparison to other options that are entirely meant for one role because, they're good at doing both of them. Like, they definitely don't reach the same DPS heights as Laevatain or Rite or even Yvonne on their own, but at the same time I would say they're roughly similar in damage output to other sub DPS like Chen or Arknight. So they're definitely not in the upper echelons of damage, but they do respectable enough damage, landing them at a solid 7 in my eyes for that category. Utility-wise, most of their kit revolves around damage like I've been talking about, whether that's as a main or sub DPS, but they do actually offer some buffs via their talent that increases physical damage taken by enemies, and even their P2, which gives the team a small attack buff. So I would rate this at a 5 because while it is useful, it's just not necessarily what they're intended to really be doing. Versatility-wise, I actually do think they're pretty solid here, mostly due to them being able to be played as a sub DPS, but on top of that, they've also got one of the easiest to trigger combo skills in the entire game. Like, you really can't go wrong just slotting them in as a random 4 slot when you're not sure what to put in a team, which is honestly kind of similar to Ardelia from earlier. But with that said, the Endmin is definitely much better in physical teams, and as such I definitely can't rate this super high, so we'll give it a solid 6. Lastly, longevity-wise, honestly, while they're really okay as main DPS and I'd say above average as a sub DPS, I really don't know if they'll last super long because they don't really excel at anything, at least for now. Like, maybe they'll get a busted potential down the line as we unlock more of them, or maybe in the future Hyperglyph will follow the Hoyo route as giving the main character more elements and different kits as a result of that, but as it is right now, I would say they're roughly around a 5 for longevity, which makes them more than usable for now and solid enough, but definitely won't last that long as we get a real main physical DPS, and there's definitely other options like Chen, Lifeng, or Pog already as a sub DPS. Moving on to one of my favorite characters in the entire game, we've got Gilberta. Gilberta is kind of a character that does it all, for lack of a better way to describe it. I mean, she's got crowd control, damage amplification, and even a bit of healing too. And if that's not enough, she also offers a small buff to the entire team's ultimate gain as well, which is pretty crazy. On paper, that is all great stuff, and in practice, for the most part, I would say it is too, but it does come with some pretty big caveats. Starting off with damage, while she's great at pretty much everything that I talked about earlier, that does kind of shoehorn her into an almost fully supportive role. And if you remember when I was talking about Ardelia earlier, I mentioned that most characters that are stuck into one role can't really do much outside of it, and here it's no different. So even though she does offer a lot overall, she definitely suffers when you look at just her damage, and as such it's pretty difficult to rate that high. But with that said, she does offer good AoE elemental application, and that can be used for reaction, so I'll rate that out of 4. Onto utility, I mean, yeah, she absolutely has a ton here, but it's also absolutely tailored to just AoE content. Like, if you play her into AoE content, she's gonna make that extremely easy for her. Like, for example, the Umber Monument stage where enemies can't move becomes a cakewalk when you have her on your team. But on the other hand, against single target content like bosses, the AoE that her kit provides immediately loses value. On top of that, while her ult does offer a big damage buff, it is relatively short-lived at only 5 seconds, and while she does offer some healing, it's somewhat small, but more importantly, it only activates when more than one enemy is hit by her regular or combo skill, which makes it inconsistent at best and literally useless at worst when against a single target. So while she is undoubtedly good, she does have some rather large issues, and as a result, I can't really rate a utility insanely high at something like a 10 or whatever, so instead I'll rate it down at an 8. She's very good, but she is definitely not perfect. Versatility wise, I think she's pretty much usable in every team in the game, and this is definitely where she shines. I found good success running her in Laevatain teams to offer some debuffs and corrosion for it, physical teams because she can actually apply some vulnerability, cryo teams with Yvonne, and even more. I mean, yes, she does have the issues that I mentioned earlier with each of her benefits having a problem attached to them, but overall I've been pretty happy with her performance in spite of that. Really, I think her biggest detractor here is that she has very solid competitions with Perlica, and when you have to compare a free 5-star to a limited 6-star, I mean, that definitely brings up some questions. So I think what I'm going to do is rate her here the same as I did for Perlica and give her a 9 for versatility, but for longevity, I'm going to give her a slightly better score than I give Perlica at an 8.5 because of the crowd control that her kit offers, which, you know, obviously Perlica doesn't. Now, we can talk about my actual favorite character, Laevatain. I've been a huge fan of Laevatain since the OG Arknights when she was still known as Surtur, and for those of you that have played the OG Arknights, you might remember a meme that went something along the lines of, just Surtur it. Funnily enough, that exact same meme can still be applied here, just, you know, with a different name. There really isn't a DPS in the game, at least for now, that does what Laevatain does, and honestly, I don't really expect to see one like her for quite a while either. Like, at least in my experience, she by and large outdamages all the other options the game has, but she also has absolutely massive AoE on top of that, which honestly kind of devalues characters like Gilberta that I was just talking about before this. If you're looking to just whack the enemy until they're dead, really, there is not a better option here than Laevatain because that is basically all she does, and she is really damn good at it. As such, her damage score is going to easily get another one of those rare 10s because she does so much of it in such a huge AoE without really anything in the game that can stop her. But on the other hand, while her damage is quite nuts, utility-wise, this is definitely where she falls off because she is basically identical to other DPS like Depan or Aviwenna, for example, where all she does is, you know, damage, and more damage. By technicality, I guess you could say she actually has really high utility, because if the enemy is dead, then it's not like you've got to worry about what else each character can do, but I digress. I think the one thing in her kit that does actually give her some real utility, or I guess more uniqueness for a better way to put it, is that one of her talents actually exists to make her more of a solo character, or I guess gives her the ability to just face tank a little bit, and that's her talent upgrade that gives her self-sustain via protection and also a bit of slow healing. So with that in mind, I'd have to rate her utility low, but definitely not the bottom of the barrel, so we'll give it a 3. Versatility wise, yeah, this one is going to be at the bottom. She is a DPS and basically can't do anything else, so this one is very easily a 1. And longevity wise, I think she's going to do okay long term due to how much damage she does, but I could definitely see her getting outscaled later down the line at some point. So she's not going to get a crazy high score or a perfect 10, but I think she easily will last for quite a while, and as such I think I'm going to give her an 8 here for that. And now onto the next one with Last Rite. She's a pretty cool character honestly, because she's got a few different ways that you can play her, and you can also do massive nukes with the Rite setup. You see what I did there? Anyone? No? Alright, anyway, moving on. While I wouldn't say she's got the same consistent level of damage that Laevatain has, she definitely has peaks that can reach even higher than she does, and as such, she can be a really fun character to play if, you like that kind of gameplay. With that said though, she can be a fairly slow character to play on field if you play her without animation cancelling, and as such, for the average player, that might end up feeling really clunky. Basically, the majority of Last Rite's damage comes from her combo skill, but also her ult, as her combo skill gives her a bunch of energy to get her ult off more consistently, and there's a few different ways that you can get to both. The generic way is to just cycle through Last Rite's rotation quickly using a character like Flurite, but you can also have a slower rotation that has a larger nuke using Perlica, or you could even cycle quicker using someone else as the on-fielder instead of Last Rite. All of them are fairly viable options, and regardless of which way you decide to play, you'll be able to pretty easily clear all the content that the game has right now. Her damage is more than respectable across the board, and as such, while I won't rate it as high as Laevatain, she easily lands at a solid 8.5. I think for the players that can get over clunkiness and actually do the animation cancelling, that can go up to a 9, but I would definitely say that depends on the player. Utility-wise, I think that she actually does have some despite being a DPS, and I think most of that comes from her flexibility. At the end of the day, she is just a damage dealer, but she does have a very large pool of teams that she can be played in, even more than the ones that I mentioned earlier. And personally, I think that is really valuable. So while it doesn't give her a lot of points, it undoubtedly gives her some, so I'll give her a 4 there. Versatility-wise, while she does have a large pool of teams, all of them are cryo, so her score really does depend on how you look at versatility as a whole. For me, due to being limited to just one type of team, I personally don't think that I can rate it that high, so I'm going to give it a 3. But for someone that values the amount of teams in general, I could definitely see it being rated higher for them. And lastly, longevity-wise, honestly, I really don't see her lasting super long overall, and once we get another ice DPS later down the line, I think she'll definitely be pushed down the list in terms of useful DPS. So I think I'll rate that at a 6. It is more than good enough right now, and arguably even better than Yvonne, but long term I think she's definitely going to fall off as she's just a launch unit. And now on to Lifeng. Lifeng is another pretty interesting character that the game has, in that he's another mixed role character. But instead of being able to be both a main and sub DPS like the Endmin for example, he's a mix of a sub DPS and support without really sacrificing anything at all in either case. Like for the Endmin, they're good at both, but they excel in neither, while Lifeng is honestly pretty solid as a slot in for either case. Now, there is one caveat here which I'll get into later, but as a sub DPS he does a pretty good amount, and for me at least that very easily gets him a 7 in terms of damage. Utility wise, this is where he kinda does excel. Not only is his damage pretty solid, but he can also apply knockdown, which pretty much every physical team enjoys, physical susceptibility, which again is pretty good for those teams, and on top of that he can also apply link, which anyone in the entire game can make use of, but considering the rest of his kit is entirely designed around physical, I mean, yeah, it'll mostly be other physical units making use of that. He can technically use link himself, which is part of what makes his damage score as solid as it is, but it is definitely a useful ability for other characters to make use of too. That said, there is one important thing that I haven't really talked about yet, and that's the fact that he offers no sustain to his team, and neither does the other 6-star physical unit Pogranichnik? Screw it, we're going with Pog. Anyway, Pog is pretty much invaluable to physical teams, and he's not really replaceable there. So, what this results in is a scenario where anytime you want to run Lifeng, you are forced to either drop Pog, which no physical team wants, or you run Sustainless, which while good for damage, is basically completely unplayable in certain content like the Ember Monument stage that has a dot applied to your team. So, while he undoubtedly offers a lot, and I normally rate him at an 8 here, I do have to dock a point and drop into a 7 for utility because of that. So with all that said, if you haven't somehow noticed it yet, the vast majority of his kit is related to either buffing physical teams or, just dealing damage, and that does make his options fairly limited in terms of where he actually wants to be used. Like sure, you can use him as a sub DPS in any team you want, and any unit in the game will benefit from Link, but he's absolutely intended to work with physical teams specifically. So as a result, I'll be putting this down at a 5. It's lower than Endmin, but it's still okay at least. And lastly, for longevity, I think in terms of the non-main DPS characters in a physical team, he is most likely the one to get replaced sooner rather than later, even more so because he's already been replaced in a lot of them. So I can't rate this really high for him, and I'll give him a 4 here. If you wanted to use him outside a physical team, sure, yeah, I can see him being okay as a generic sub DPS, but there's definitely better options, so it would only bump it up to a 5 at best. And since I had to talk about Pog in that last segment, now's a good time to bring him up. Pog is arguably one of the better units in the entire game, albeit it just for the physical element. He offers a ton of SP recovery, good damage, debuff application, buffs to the team, and even off-field damage, which is extremely rare too. Like, this guy does so much across the board that I'd honestly put his value for accounts in general very, very high, again, at least assuming you do want to run a physical team. Damage-wise, due to all the different debuffs as well as the buffs that he applies himself, not to mention how synergistic the physical teams that use him are as a whole, he can actually deal a really respectable amount of damage, which I'd say easily puts him into the sub-DPS category, despite of all the buffs and debuffs that he does. Considering the level of other sub-DPS in the game, for example like Chen, who I'd say are very good, I would personally put his damage at around a 7. Utility-wise, I mean, yeah, he actually just genuinely does a ton. Like, not only does he offer off-field damage, which is, again, extremely rare in its own right, but the fact that he can recover SP alone is pretty impactful too. If you add on top of that the fact that he can buff ally attack and arts damage and increase physical damage taken by enemies, I mean, you've got a really, really potent character here. It is very hard to rate his utility low as a result of all that, though because he is intended to work with physical teams, I do have to dock at least 1 point off, so instead of a 10, he's going to get a 9 for utility. Versatility wise, I mean, you technically can run him outside of physical teams, even more so if you were to give him a generic weapon like the Thermite Cutter to buff the team's overall attack, but I really wouldn't say that's where he excels by any means, and as such, opposite to his utility, I would have to rate his versatility pretty low here at a 3. And longevity-wise, right now at least, he is by and large the most impactful unit on physical teams, with the only real competition being Chen as a sub-DPS as well as the vulnerability that she applies, so I think he's got a place in physical teams for a very, very long time. So, just like how Zaihi in the 4 and 5 star video got almost a perfect score here for longevity, with again, similar to her, 1 point being docked due to the physical specific nature of his kit. And lastly, onto one of the biggest goobers in the game, we've got Yvonne. Honestly, up until Gilberta's release, I think the only thing that could really be said about Yvonne is that she was a really, really weird unit. But she was weird mostly because she didn't really have a team that worked for her, and as such, most of her team options ended up having basically identical clear times regardless of what you ran with her. But now that Gilberta has released, she's moved from being really weird to actually having a pretty solid spot in the game, at least in my opinion. For those of you unfamiliar, as she is one of the newest characters in the game, Yvonne is almost entirely a single target character, with the one exception in her kit being her combo skill that attacks in a small AoE. And as a result of all that, for the most part, she is what I would consider to be a consistent damage dealer. Like, she doesn't have crazy nukes like last Rite, and she also doesn't have massive AoE like a character like Laevatain, but when you're focusing down one enemy, she more than does the job. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, now that Gilberta is in the game, she does actually combo fairly well with her, and she also gains some AoE capabilities via comboing her own combo skill with Gilberta's regular skill that brings all the enemies together. So overall, while she doesn't reach the same peaks as last Rite, for example, she still does respectable enough damage, and I would say that puts her slightly lower than last Rite at around an 8.5, without the capability to go up to a 9 like last Rite can with sweaty gameplay. Utility-wise, I think she's actually got a pretty big bonus here that other DPS don't, and that's the fact that her gameplay revolves around solidification, which means that she inherently has crowd control baked into her kit. As you know, solidification means the enemy gets frozen. Stuff like that can be very impactful, and when timed properly, you can interrupt enemy attacks, which is quite nice to have in your arsenal as a DPS compared to other options that literally just kill the enemy with no other nuance in their kit. So, at least personally, I would give her a couple points here over the other DPS that I've talked about today with Laevatain and last Rite at around a 6. Versatility-wise though, similar to the other characters, she is basically just a DPS, with one exception where you can actually run her with last Rite as a dual DPS team comp to build cryo infliction stacks really quickly. It is definitely not the best in the game by any means whatsoever, but it works and is definitely fun, so I'll give her a 3 similar to last Rite as they're paired together there. And lastly, for longevity, honestly, I really don't know where to put this. I mean, considering we already have 2 cryo DPS in the game, I don't really think they're going to introduce a 3rd super soon, so by that logic we could say that she'll last quite a while, but once that future cryo DPS is introduced, I could very easily see her dropping off as she's already outscaled by other characters like Laevatain in patch 1.0, let alone what's going to come later. So I think if you want to look more short term, then I guess she's fine, and I'd give her a longevity score of 7, but considering the whole point of this ranking is just how long they're going to last, I mean, yeah, after that future cryo unit releases, I think she's going to be moved out, and as such I have to rate this at a 5. And that's pretty much everyone. I would love to hear your thoughts on all these characters yourself, so feel free to leave a comment down below or join my Discord link down in the description to talk with me about it. As future characters release, I might go through them as well, so let me know if that's something you'd like to see going forward. And as always, thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and maybe give my other videos a shot too.